So for the past few days I've had my SIM secreted inside of this slender wee smartphone, the Sony Xperia 5 Mark V. It's a compact and still pricey but not quite as expensive alternative to the Xperia 1 flagship phone. And this pleasingly dinky 6.1-inch blower is aimed at creative youngsters who like to do stuff like TikToks. So who better to bang on about it than a worn-out bitter old bastard who loathes social media. The Sony Xperia 5 Mark V will cost you £849 direct from Sony. Here's my full unboxing and review, and for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! So first up, what is in that rather unique and interesting looking box? Well, besides the phone, it's basically just a bunch of quick start guides and warranty guff. As usual, no adapter, you don't even get a USB cable chucked in there, or even a pokey pin thing to get the SIM tray out, because it's one of those drag out with your fingernails efforts. Which is pretty good unless you happen to not have any fingernails. Good old anxiety attacks, gotta love them. Now as usual, the Sony Xperia 5 Mark V is basically a miniaturized version of the Xperia 1. And that more compact 6.1-inch display combined with the elongated aspect ratio makes for some truly god-tier hand feel. Although those bezels down the left and right hand side seem to have enlarged slightly versus previous efforts. And this Xperia has to be one of the lightest blowers of 2023 so far, just 183 grams, so it certainly feels nice and light compared with even quite a lot of those plasticky budget blowers. But there's nary a sniff of plastic here. Thankfully, you've got Gorilla Glass Victus 2 front and back, and then sandwiched in between you've got yourself a metal frame. And those edges are mostly flat, but the Xperia 5 Mark V still feels pretty lush when you're clutching it tight. But sadly, there is bugger all grip here. All of those surfaces are super smooth as usual, so it's a very brave soul who slaps this down on the arm of the sofa while I bugger off to fetch a beer. Sony is offering a choice of 3 colours for the Xperia 5 Mark V, black, blue and platinum silver. I've got the black one, and frankly I think it's a wee bit boring. I certainly would have preferred one of the lighter models, and also it just makes me nostalgic for all those classic gorgeous Sony colours of yesteryear, the crimsons and the moody sultry greens and all that good stuff. I have to go lie down for a bit. Like seriously, this colour is so boring that even my camera is just like, ugh, can I just focus on the background instead please? Oh, and as usual, fully IP68 water and dust resistant, so you can get it very, very moist indeed. Drop it underwater, as long as you pluck it out and towel it off, it'll be absolutely fine. Now, unlocking this smartphone is achieved with Sony's usual edge-mounted fingerprint sensor, which is very effective, super responsive. I rarely have to tap twice with this thing. The positioning on that frame is quite low compared with some rivals, so there was a period of adjustment when I actually figured out exactly where that bloody sensor was. But once I'd been using the Xperia 5 Mark V for a few days, absolutely no worries. My muscle memory changed, so no complaints there, really. My only issue is that you still don't have any face recognition here on the Sony Xperia 5 Mark V, which is something that even the Pixels do these days. I can't think of a single other smartphone that doesn't offer face recognition these days, and I know it's less secure than the old fingerprint sensor, but it can be really handy if, for instance, you're cooking or baking or whatever, but your hands are all manky. Do the trusty old knuckle push of that power button and then just gun for the camera, and you're straight in. As for the software, well, it is of course Android 13, hopefully to be updated to Android 14 imminently, although Sony is only guaranteeing 2 years of Android updates and 3 years of security updates. And since the Xperia 5 Mark V doesn't come with Android 14 fresh out of the box, that is a real shame. I know 3 years of security updates is fine. People generally upgrade their phone around the sort of 3 to 4 year mark these days. But still, a lot of rivals like Samsung and Google are offering longer support than that. So especially when you're paying 850 quid for something, you'd kind of hope it would go the distance. Oh, that frickin' Hercules song's stuck in my head now. Now, Sony's take on Android hasn't really changed up for the Xperia 5 Mark V. It's very familiar territory. Got the same notifications panel as the likes of the Pixel blowers, Google Discover feed, all the classics, but it's got that bit of Sony flair thrown in. All those classic bangers like a good bit of side sense action. And quite a few bonus features, most of them centered around creative users as well as entertainment and gaming. So for instance, you've got Music Pro slapped on here again, which allows you to produce your very own hit single or catchy jingle using just the harmonious tones of your voice, and a small selection of supported instruments. If you've got a Sony DSLR camera, which you like to record a lot of video with, or you can even use this Xperia smartphone as a 4K viewfinder, you can check the peak and levels, make sure the focus isn't bollocks, you can even record a backup onto here. Although one ball ache on that front is the fact that Sony is only offering the Xperia 5 Mark V with 120 gigs of storage, which is rather paltry, and they're not even giving you the option of stuffing extra cash into their brassiere in order to double it up. And to somewhat make up for this, Sony, as usual, has given you microSD memory card support here. Pretty much the only bugger that does still give you memory card access in your premium blower. But yeah, considering even quite a lot of budget-friendly mid-range mobiles these days offer at least a 256 gig option, it's kind of a shame that there's no such option here. So that screen, we are talking a 6.1-inch OLED panel here with the usual stretched out 21:9 aspect ratio. And yeah, it's not particularly well suited to reading, especially manga, but it does work very well for multitasking, and it also means bugger all letterboxing when you are streaming some cinematic fare. Those Full HD Plus visuals are pin sharp on this more miniature display, and of course you've got full HDR streaming support, while the Xperia 5 Mark V can automatically upscale SDR content to HDR level visuals. In lower light, the Xperia 5 Mark V does appear to have a very cool display compared with most rivals. And even when I manually piddled about with those colour settings, I found that when I was in a more ambiently lit room, there was always a slight tint that I couldn't completely eradicate. Thankfully, this isn't really noticeable most of the time, and you've got the usual eye comfort mode shenanigans if you're enjoying a bit of hot hentai tentacle action into the wee hours. Did I say hot hentai tentacle action? I actually obviously meant the bear. Love a bit of the bear. Who doesn't enjoy the bear, right? As for the refresh rate, well, the Xperia 5 Mark V can either hit 60 or 120 Hz. There's no LTPO tech here, but as you'll see when we get onto battery life, that's really not that much of an issue. And for the Mark V, Sony has upgraded the stereo speaker setup here as well, which to be fair was pretty bloody good on the Mark IV. Let's boost that volume and check it out.
So for the past week, I've been using this almighty blower right here, the iPhone 15 Pro Max, a mobile so big that even your mum would struggle to fit it inside of her purse. Forget the Pro Max, it should really be called the Pro Lapse, because that's exactly what my rectum did when I tried to squeeze this thing inside of my jeans.
So you've got some proper loud sounds spaffed out by the Xperia 5 Mark V when you max that volume, and not too tinny either considering the size of this thing. I still wouldn't use the speakers to listen to music. You definitely want to hook up a pair of headphones, which by the way, you bloody well can do using the headphone jack. You don't have to go wireless. But if you do decide to go wireless, well, you're pretty much guaranteed good audio all the same. You've got support for all the usual codecs, good bit of LDAC action, aptX HD, you've got high-res audio support, and Sony's digital sound enhancement engine is, as always and forever, slapped on here too, so good news if you're still clinging on to some treasured old MP3 files for whatever reason. You can basically just shake them up a bit, make them sound less cack. Now, bugger all plaints when it comes to the performance, because what you got slapped inside of the Sony Xperia 5 Mark V is Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which, yes, is about to be succeeded in just a few short weeks by the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, but it still provides pretty meaty performance. So the everyday experience are nice and smooth, and as you would expect from an 8 Gen 2 device, games like Genshin Impact play bloody beautifully, even when you boost those graphics settings all the way up to the top levels. Sony's cooling system seems to do the job because, while this phone does get a little bit warm, shall we say, when you've been gaming for more than about 30 minutes, I found that the performance wasn't really throttled, or certainly not to a noticeable degree. That frame rate remained pretty fluid. And even though it's quite a dinky display, I found it perfectly comfortable for gaming, helped along by the fact that it is completely flat, of course. And then, of course, as always, Sony's added in its excellent Game Enhancer feature. This adds in a fantastic set of tools that really do help out when you are gaming. So for instance, you've got the usual game mode shenanigans. You can flip between various preset modes, battery life, balanced or performance. Otherwise you've got a custom mode where you can tweak the touch response if you find it's just a little bit too sensitive or not sensitive enough, the refresh rate, etc. Definitely approve of the focus settings as well, which allow you to block notifications and calls and anything that might disturb you mid-game. And certainly if you like to stream your gameplay, you've got tons of features to enjoy here, like Exmor-T record, which can record the last 30 seconds of your game at all times, just in case you did something unexpectedly awesome and you want to save that. And you can record it up to 1080p Full HD resolution. You can also activate the likes of the front camera. You can get a specific kind of microphone hooked up for your insightful commentary. Certainly loads of great features to play around with in there, so gamers should be very happy indeed. Unfortunately, I did find that connectivity was occasionally a bit of a ball ache here on the Xperia 5 Mark V, so when I was out and about using mobile data, quite often lingering on 4G with quite slow connections. Web pages would occasionally take like 10-15 seconds to load up, my podcasts and Deezer would occasionally buffer, and even on Wi-Fi things were occasionally a wee bit slow. It might just be an early days bug that's hopefully going to get kicked right in the knackers. But thankfully, no complaints whatsoever when it comes to the battery life. Somehow Sony has managed to stuff a 5,000 mAh capacity cell inside of the Xperia 5 Mark V. And I found that was more than enough for a full long day of play, even if you've got that screen maxed out at 120Hz full time, got the always on display on, all of those power sapping features. The only way I actually managed to kill this thing in a single day was with a lot of video chat action, using the camera absolutely tons, and even then it was a close call. So seriously, I never saw less than around 7 to 8 hours of screen on time from a full charge of this thing. It could last you a full weekend if you don't go crazy. You've got the now very popular adaptive charging tech slapped on here as well, so as usual it can cunningly learn your charging habits and then adjust the charging speed so it never overcharges, or certainly very rarely anyway, thus hopefully prolonging the life of your battery. And while it's certainly not the fastest charging smartphone, it's not the slowest either. You'll get around a half charge in around half an hour, and of course you've got wireless charging support too. So overall the battery life gets a big bloody thumbs up. As for the camera tech, well, big changes there compared with the Xperia 1s and Xperia 5s of yesteryear, because now you've only got a dual lens setup. So what you've got here is a 52 megapixel 24mm primary sensor, 48 megapixels of which is used to capture an image, while the rest is purely for focus. And the Xperia captures images at 12 meg resolution using the usual pixel binning shenanigans. And this sensor now doubles up as a 48mm effort as well, because there's no dedicated telephoto shooter here on the Xperia 5 Mark V. That secondary lens is a 16mm ultra wide angle effort. Now when you want to snap something like our lovely subject Veronica here, Sony has served up the usual dedicated Photo Pro app. And this offers the same DSLR style experience that you get from the Xperia 1 flagship. So when you first boot this up, you'll be in the basic mode by default. And this offers a similar shooting style experience to what you get on most of the smartphones, the likes of an iPhone, a Samsung Galaxy. It is basically a case of point and shoot. You've got various filters that you can play around with. You've got a night auto mode. You can turn on burst shooting if you fancy a bit of that for your action shots. You've got a portrait bokeh style effect. All pretty straightforward stuff, but with a quick flick here you can switch to the auto mode. This is once again very much a point and shoot style affair, but now with a DSLR style layout. So now you swap between the various lenses like so, and all of your main features over here, but as you can see most of them are grayed out, you can't actually directly control them. Keep on flipping and you'll get to program auto, and now as you can see quite a lot of those features have come into play, so you can again change up the continuous shooting mode, change up the focus settings and also the focus area. You can also play around with the ISO levels, HDR, and as you can see you got direct control over the EV with this handy little slider up top. One of the only settings you can't mess around with is the shutter speed unless you flip on to the next option, then as you can see you've got a slider for that. And using a combination of these manual controls and Sony's 6 creative look modes which tweak the tones and the overall saturation levels, you can easily get a very different vibe with any photo in just a couple of taps. In bright conditions I did find that the auto mode occasionally oversaturated a photo, but you can sort that out quickly and easily, adding a bit of proper texture in there. You can also brighten up and boost those tones if you'd prefer something more akin to what you'd get from a Samsung or an Apple snapper. And thankfully that viewfinder will show you an accurate representation of the end result, so you don't need to constantly flip between the camera app and your photos to see if you muffed everything up with your changes. Now occasionally you will get a blurry pic if you're shooting something with limbs and free will, but Sony's excellent burst shot mode counters this nicely, ensuring you'll get a few sharp efforts chucked in. And this and the eye autofocus works really well as usual on kids as well as fluffy things. Action shots really are a piece of piss with the Xperia. And when I moved indoors, this blower captured some crisp, clean looking images. The Xperia 5 Mark V doesn't spaff out warm, unnatural looking photos, rather tones are accurately captured with little noise. And likewise, Sony has smashed those evening shots with a long exposure that takes its time but results in bright, fine looking photos. It's certainly quite the turnaround from just a couple of years ago. The Xperia can also pump out good looking portrait shots using that main shooter with some snazzy bokeh style action. As I mentioned before, the second lens on that arse end is a 12 megapixel 16mm ultra-wide snapper, and this offers consistent results compared with the primary lens. It's certainly good for a more eye-catching result. But it is a shame that there is no dedicated telephoto shooter slapped here on the Xperia 5 Mark V, especially as you'll find it on pretty much any other smartphone around this sort of price point. Now, while you can shoot video inside of that Photo Pro camera app, you're actually best off jumping instead into the Video Pro app. It's a separate effort. Oh, finger in the way. As you can see there, this once again offers DSLR style controls, so you can smoothly zoom in and out. It's really just cropping. Swap between a manual focus and an autofocus. There's loads of different options that you can play around with here. Or even more alternatively, if you'd rather shoot a more cinematic style video, well, there's always the Cinema Pro app, which adds in a variety of filters that can really change up the vibe. And I found that the Xperia's 4K resolution video looked slick whether I used the filters or not. Every frame is packed with detail, and Sony's stabilization is some proper Billy Big Bollocks action as usual. For the audio, Sony's chucked in a voice priority option where the rear mic is prioritized, as well as wind reduction. Otherwise, you can enjoy a proper surround sound audio playback. I gotta say, for me, this does feel like overkill. They have overcomplicated things just a smidge, and I haven't even mentioned the good old Video Creator app. This can create short, shareable videos on your behalf. Just select some clips you want to toss together, and they'll be stitched up with some background music. Otherwise, you can get personally involved, cropping and adjusting the saturation, the colors, etc. Now, I did find that occasionally when I was shooting video with the Xperia 5 Mark V, things would get a little bit juddery. I wasn't sure if this was just happening on screen, but unfortunately the final video file was also affected. I don't think that's a performance issue. I think that's just a software glitch of some description, which hopefully Sony will sort right out. And then last up, around the front end of the Sony Xperia 5 Mark V, you have a basic 12 megapixel selfie shooter, which is absolutely fine again for those simple shareable shots. Doesn't seem to give a shit whether you're shooting against bright backgrounds or in fairly low light. Occasionally in more ambient conditions things got very warm indeed, but it was fine. And using that front-facing selfie shooter, you can record up to 4K Ultra HD footage, which not all premium smartphones offer that with the selfie cam. And the Xperia 5 Mark V certainly does the job fine for Skype and Zoom and etc. I had no issues with my video chats. Mics pick up your vocals nice and clear. And there you have it, that's my thoughts on the Sony Xperia 5 Mark V. I certainly do like it. I've enjoyed using it as my personal smartphone, especially as it's just that little bit more dinky. So they come into this thing from the iPhone 15 Pro Max. It just feels so much nicer. The battery life is better. Camera tech, excellent stuff, especially if you are a bit more pro, you know your way around a DSLR. So creators have got lots to love here as well, especially if again they use the Sony DSLR. Gamers will enjoy the heck out of this thing. Just a few little complaints here and there. The fact you've only got 128 gigs of storage, regardless of the fact that it is expandable. The screen, again, that slight tint in the low light conditions did slightly annoy me, but I'm sure it's the kind of thing that most people wouldn't even notice. Oh, and more software support, please, Sony. That would be very much appreciated too. But anyway, that's what this bald northern git reckons of the Xperia 5 Mark V. It'd be great to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech. And have yourselves a ruddy, wonderful rest of the week. Cheers, everyone. Love you.